Hey folks, welcome to this week's episode of Kickstart Your Real Estate Investing. In this episode, we continue our discussion around common underwriting mistakes which happen when you try to underwrite certain properties. Okay, so in this week's episode, we'll talk about the second underwriting mistake which can happen is when you do not keep aside a good amount of money or do not account for capital expenditure, which can happen. So you don't set aside capital reserves, which can affect your net cash flow and also affect the profitability of your particular investment. Okay, so let's take an example of that. So when you look at a particular property, there are some big things you look at when you try to do cash flow analysis. Obviously, you look at your rental income which comes in. So you look at your gross rental income which you can make on a particular investment property. Then you start taking out your operating expenses. Now these are common expenses you can account for, which you already know. So it could be your HOA fees, it could be your property taxes, it could be your insurance, and so on. And then comes the next section which you need to do is keep aside some reserves. Now there are two types of reserves. One is your operating expenses reserve and second is the capital expenditure reserve. Now the operating expenses reserve is kept aside some amount of your or some percentage of your money which you keep aside based on the rental income which is coming in, and that account for any unexpected expenses which you can encounter when your tenant is living on your property. So what's a good example of that? So let's assume your tenant is living there and one day there is a leaky faucet. Now the faucet is leaking, you need to call in a plumber. The plumber will come in, he'll have a look at it, he'll fix it, he might charge you $200 for that, which is fine. You would then go and make sure that you have enough operating expenses reserves from which you can take out the $200 and pay the plumber. So in general cases, you might see an operating expense reserve is like 5% of your gross rental income. So if you are making $24,000 a year in gross rental income, you might set aside 5% of that, which is $1,200. So now $100 per month is kept aside, or $1,200 per year is kept aside for expenses like this, where a tenant might call you and say, my faucet is leaking, or the electricity is not working, or any of the other expenses which can come in the day-to-day use of a particular property. All fair and good there. The mistake happens when you do not account for capital expenditure. Now, when we are underwriting properties, that's not the first thing which comes to our mind. We don't start thinking of what if the roof has a damage, or what if the HVAC stops working, or what if the water heater stops working. So we don't account a good amount of money for capital expenditures. We don't keep that enough in the reserve. We might make the mistake of keeping the same percentage as your operating expense, and you might just keep it, let's say 5% of my rental income I'm going to keep aside for capital expenditures. So in this case, if you have $24,000 which is coming in as your rental income per year, you might keep 5% of that and say, okay, this is going to be my capital expenditure reserve, and this $1,200 which I'm going to keep aside can help me with my capital expenditure. But the bigger problem here is that capital expenditures are big expenses. So if your roof gets damaged and it cannot be repaired, and if the roof is very old, you're looking at anything from $15,000 to $20,000 worth of expenses. If your HVAC system stops working, and if it's been pretty old, like 12 to 15 years old, you're looking at another $15,000 to $17,000 in terms of expenses. So the $1,200 which are kept aside for your capital expenditure will not cover such big expenses which might come your way. So you should always keep in mind that whenever you're underwriting properties, you're also looking at the age of the property and the age of the equipments which are inside the property. So big ticket items like roof, HVAC or HVAC units, or water heaters, those are very big expenses or big capital expenses which you need to account for. Now, how do you go about accounting for that? One is when you're buying the property and you can negotiate in the price itself, saying that, hey, I'm buying this property, the roof and the HVAC system seems to be only at least 15 years old. I know few years down the line, I might be hit with a big expense when I have to replace this item. So why don't I account for it in the price itself? So that's one way you can account for it, where you try and reduce the price and bring it down to a point where that money you can keep aside, knowing that expenditure is going to come your way. Okay. So the next thing you should do once you've negotiated a good price is go and buy a good home warranty. What does the home warranty cover? The home warranty covers all these big ticket items for you, And if you buy the home warranty and they're all in good working condition, the home warranty company will replace them free of cost for you. Yes, they will still charge you to come in and have a look at it, diagnose the problem. But if the problem cannot be fixed, then they will go ahead and replace that for you. Okay, so folks, keep this in mind when you're underwriting properties. Always keep a look at your capital expenditure which you might encounter. So by doing that, you make sure that the cash flow which you receive is safe and it's not affected by any big ticket items or big expenditures which may come your way. Hope this episode was helpful to you. If you feel this has helped you, please go ahead and like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you. Bye.